Hello and welcome back to another O2GT Premier League predictions video. Yes, we're back as the season draws to a close. So again, well, the game's going as thick and fast really, so it's literally Sundays I'm recording this. Brighton have just been knocked out of the FA Cup semi-final by Manchester United. What a brilliant game that was though. But we're not here to talk about the FA Cup, we're here to talk about the Premier League and how I think the games will go in the coming week. As with every Premier League predictions video, we are going to take a look at last week's predictions, see how well we did, and shock, we actually got one prediction right. Boy, isn't that exciting? But yeah, this was a pretty good game week. I'd say there were less games than normal. I really enjoyed it, to be fair. Each day had some very, very fun games, so let's just jump into it. I'm going to start off with Arsenal versus Southampton. Now, I predicted 3-0 to Arsenal. It's actually a 3-0 draw. And it was a spectacular match from the Saints as they took the lead 1 minute in and doubled it only 13 minutes later. Honestly, the Southampton were on fire in this match. I think it's one of the best games they've played this season for sure. Arsenal had to fight back and did manage to end up sharing the points with Southampton, the side at the bottom of the league. But have they bottled the title? I think they might have. And then we move on to the Saturday fixtures and we start with Fulham versus Leeds. Now I predicted 2-1 and it was 2-1. This is the one I nailed. Let's fucking go, boys. Now, Fulham, they were the dominant side throughout, but only managed to open the scoring in the second half. So Leeds actually held firm for quite a while, in the first half at least. Fulham players scored all the goals here, with Polina accidentally pulling in his own net. But that shouldn't take away from his performance because he's had a great season so far, and he played well in that game as well. It's just unfortunate that he scored Leeds' goal. And then move on to Crystal Palace versus Everton. I predicted 2-0 to Palace. It was actually 0-0. And high-scoring Palace could not break down Everton despite the away side going down to 10 men. Everton made it tough for Palace, and while the Eagles did have their chances, they just couldn't net any of them. Roy is still unbeaten though, so he's got that going for him. But it was actually shocking to see Palace not score, especially when they went down to 10 men. Could really do on the Palace result, to be honest. And then move on to Liverpool versus Nottingham Forest. Now I predicted 4-0 to Liverpool. It was actually 3-2, and honestly, despite the result, I'm happy with that performance. Forest, they fought really well as they came from behind twice at Anfield. They showed some real fight, which the squad has sorely missed in their past few matches. It was Salah who ultimately won it for the home side after some questionable defending from Forest, but I think Forest should be really proud of that performance because they played some brilliant football, and scoring 2 away goals after the season we've had is pretty impressive. Morgan Gibbs-White and Nico Williams, absolutely phenomenal. I think that was Nico's best game in a Forest shirt for sure. Then move on to Brentford versus Aston Villa. Now I predicted 3-1 to Aston Villa. It was actually just 1-0. And Villa looked off it as Luis struck late to salvage a point for the Villains. Brentford are strong at home and they really showcased that here. Kept Villa at bay for a large majority of the match, and especially Ollie Watkins, who was basically shut out by the Bees and got very little service. Villa struck at the death and there's nothing Brentford could do about it. And finally, for Saturday, Leicester versus Wolves. Now I predicted 2-0 to Wolves. It's actually 2-1 to Leicester. Leicester came back from behind to secure themselves a vital 3 points, which saw them lift out of the relegation zone. It was Castagne who ultimately scored the winner, and Wolves just couldn't get back into the match. I don't know what Dean Smith is cooking, but he's cooking nonetheless. And then move on to Sunday, probably the most entertaining of the 3 days. We start off with Newcastle versus Tottenham Hotspur. Now I predicted 2-1 to Newcastle. It was actually 6-1. Newcastle went 3 up before 10 minutes. And then 5 up within 20. Spurs did manage to shore things up and hooked Lloris at half time, which dramatically changed their performances. Kane did score a consolation goal, but it was pretty much a cruise control for the Geordies. They scored the 6th goal and that was that. Very, very impressive for Newcastle and really staking their claim to a top 4 spot after the performance they just had. And finally, Bournemouth versus West Ham United. I predicted 2-2 draw. It's actually 4-0 from West Ham. And it was a dominant performance from the Hammers as they took the game to the home side, scoring 3 goals in the first half. Fornals made it 4-0, scoring a scorpion kick. That's crazy. Bro just decided to score a scorpion kick to really stick the nail in Bournemouth's coffin. What a game. What a week of football, to be honest. I mean, we got one prediction right, which is always good. But yeah, it's just really enjoyable. It's not often when your side loses, but you can still feel optimistic. And that's what happened with us in Liverpool. But yeah, got some midweek games this week. Well, midweek game week. So we're going to move on to game week 33. I'm going to start off with the Tuesday fixtures and Wolverhampton Wanderers versus Crystal Palace. Wolves host Crystal Palace at the Molineux as both sides are very, very close to one another in the table. Both sides have been through slumps in form this season, but both look to be out of it now. and both look like they'll be able to survive another season of the Premier League. Wolves themselves have become quite the formidable side in recent matches, growing many important points which has lifted them away from the relegation zone. Crystal Palace were having problems scoring goals and winning matches under Vieira, but Roy has solved both of those problems, and he seems to have gotten this Palace side playing some good football, and it looks like they won't be dragged into the relegation scrap anytime soon. I mean, there was always a chance they would under Vieira, but it looks like they've stabilised the ship under Roy. Both teams' recent matches didn't look too great, as Wolves lost to Leicester and Palace drew to a 10-man Everton team, so I'm going to say 1-0. I can see this being a good match between two sides. Both are in some decent form at the moment, and both look like scoring goals. Wolves love scoring at home, and Palace love scoring in general. I can see both sides being quite tough for the other to break down, and I think this match will be very end-to-end. Looking at Palace's games under Roy, they normally take a while to break down teams, whereas Wolves can often score quite early on. It'll be very interesting to see these two teams go up against each other and how they perform against one another, because they are sort of polar opposites in a way. You know, Palace take time to break down teams, whereas Wolves, they can do it quite quickly, so it's going to be an interesting one. And then move on to Aston Villa versus Fulham. Now this is a top half clash as the Villains host Fulham at Villa Park. Both teams have been enjoying successful seasons so far, with Villa looking like they could be challenging for Europe, despite dropping points to Brentford at the weekend. Fulham have also had a decent season, shedding the yoke of being a yo-yo club but actually putting up solid performances, looking to cement themselves as a Premier League side. And I think they will. They've got a really good core of players, and I think, you know, they can cement themselves as a Premier League side for a good couple of seasons at least. Fulham are one of the only in a handful of sides to have kept the manager they started the season with, whilst Villa brought in Emery after Gerrard could not get the results the side needed. Both opponents have been brilliant though, and their league positions reflect that. Fulham looked fairly comfortable against Leeds, only conceding to an own goal, which they were looking to avoid in Birmingham. One of the many things they were looking to avoid in Birmingham. I'm saying 3-1 to Villa though. As well as Fulham have been playing, Villa are just in some sparkling form at the moment, and at home they'll be a very formidable side. Very tough for Fulham to break down. Now Martinez did go off in Villa's match against Brentford due to a collision with Tony, so it remains to be seen if that was just for a precaution and if he'll be back for this clash. If not, it's going to be very tough for Villa because their backup keeper isn't great. Fulham are still without Mitrovic though. They still look to be scoring goals without him, and that makes the lives of Villa's backline a lot easier as they won't have to deal with the Serbian. It does remain to be seen who Villa will have in net. Then move on to Leeds United versus Leicester City, a proper bottom of the table scrap as these two sides sit just above the relegation zone. Leicester just about climbed out the relegation zone with that huge win over Wolves, but it was only on goal difference. Leeds find themselves just a point clear of the relegation zone, so this really is a 6-pointer for both sides. Neither team are playing good football at the moment, and that's reflected in their dismal league positions. Leicester did recently appoint Dean Smith, who after an expected loss to City grabbed them a vital win over Wolves, and has shown what sort of side his Leicester City will be. It's not looking good for Leeds, who have failed to grab a win in their past 3 matches, conceding 13 in that time and only scoring 2. It's not looking good for that Yorkshire-based side. I'm saying 2-1 to Leicester. While both sides aren't playing great, Leicester look like the slightly better team at the moment, despite just grabbing 1 win in their past 5. Against Wolves, they show some great fight and some great resilience as well to come back from behind to claim all 3 points, and I think that bodes well for their trip to Ellen Road. You know, a jolt of confidence into this Leicester City side, and they'll probably be flying. Leeds can have their moments and I expect them to score again, but I think Leicester will have it in them just to take all 3 points back to the East Midlands. Then move on to Wednesday's fixture, and we start off with Nottingham Forest versus Brighton Hove Albion. Brighton travelled to Nottingham after the FA Cup clash against Manchester United, went all the way to extra time and then penalties. Unfortunately for Brighton fans, they did lose, so it's interesting to see what sort of mental state they'll be in for this clash. I also expect Brighton to rest some players after that massive match, but they're also suffering from injuries too, so it'll be very interesting to see what sort of squad they field in Nottingham. Forest are also suffering from plenty of injuries themselves, but what's new, our season has been defined by just an insane amount of injuries. It's actually pain how many people we have injured. Brighton are a very well-oiled machine under De Zerbi and play some beautiful attacking football. They can be a very lethal side on their day. They're honestly scary. Forest, on the other hand, have not been having a great time with it recently, but despite their loss to Liverpool, they showed great character and fight to fight back against Liverpool, scoring twice and almost sharing the points at Anfield. The squad have many reasons to be confident and to take the match to Brighton, which, if done properly, they could make it tough for them. I mean, we drew in Brighton, so that bodes slightly well for us. I'm going to say 1-0. I think Forest will just nick it. Before the Liverpool match, I would not have thought that Forest could get a result against Brighton, but after that performance we saw and how Brighton played into extra time during the FA Cup, we do have a good chance of getting something. I think tiredness will start to creep in on those Brighton players, especially the ones that played the full 120 minutes, and then falling out of the FA Cup on penalties can't be good for a player's mental state, so we'll have to see what happens with Brighton, and hopefully they have a little FA Cup slump. and hopefully we grab a vital 3 points. We know Brighton are a very lethal attacking side, but with the injuries and extra time, I think Forest can do some magic at the City ground. But again, Brighton, brilliant side, they could very easily just take it in their stride and take the game to Forest and batter us at the City ground, but I'm hoping for a little bit of City ground magic on Wednesday night. Then we move on to Chelsea versus Brentford. Now this is a West London derby that sees Chelsea host Brentford. Both sides are currently quite evenly matched, with Brentford actually sitting with Chelsea in the table. Chelsea have not had a great season so far. It doesn't look like that's improving anytime soon. Chelsea sacked Potter and hired Frank Lampard to manage them until the end of the season, but so far he has not won a single game, including 2 Champions League clashes against Real Madrid, but to be fair, they're one of the favourites to win it, so they weren't really expected to grab a result there. Brentford have had a better season in comparison, but both sides have the same form over their last 5 matches. Normally you'd expect sides to be better at home, but for Chelsea, that's not really been the case this season, especially at the moment. Stamford Bridge has seen many a loss. Brentford are a very formidable side themselves and are looking to make this a tough game for their West London rivals. I'm saying 2-1 to Brentford. Again, I do not see Chelsea winning at home, and I have a feeling it will go similarly to their match against Brighton. As mentioned, Brentford are a very formidable side and will no doubt be up for this West London clash. I do see Chelsea scoring, as Brentford have not kept a clean sheet in their last 6 matches, but Brentford will make it hard for Chelsea to do that, there's no doubt. I can see it being another loss for Frank, and raises questions if Chelsea could fall into the relegation scrap. Now that does seem very unlikely at the moment. If they stop picking up points, and then the teams below them do pick up points, they could fall down the league, and they could find themselves maybe in a relegation scrap, as unlikely as that could be. I think I'd be there for it, Chelsea in the relegation scrap, they face Forest in a couple weeks, so that'd be very interesting, but I think Chelsea will lose to Brentford here as well. Then move on to West Ham United versus Liverpool. West Ham can be confident going into this clash after soundly defeating Bournemouth and sharing the points with Arsenal in their recent fixtures. Liverpool have also been performing quite well recently, winning games and beginning their climb up the league to salvage some form of European football. West Ham have turned around their fortunes and are giving a good accounting of themselves as they look to survive for another season in the Premier League. And for what it's worth, I think they will. Both teams also drew against high-flying Arsenal, which was very impressive. Liverpool, I think it's safe to say, have not been performing at their best this season, but look to be returning to that side last season. As Jota is back amongst the goals, this should be a good match. I'm saying 3-2 to Liverpool. I think Liverpool will play out another 3-2 win. West Ham played brilliantly against Bournemouth and played well against sides at home. As I've said though, Liverpool have started playing well, and despite being hampered by injuries this season, a lot of their players are returning now, and you can see in Liverpool's results as well when those players are returning. West Ham will make it hard for Liverpool, but I see the Scouse side just overcoming the London side here, but it should be a brilliant game nonetheless. Then move on to Manchester City versus Arsenal. Now this is a title-defining clash. Arsenal have not been having a good time recently, dropping points in their last 3 fixtures, and if that trend continues, it's not looking good for their title hopes. Manchester City, on the other hand, have been soaring. Currently on a 16-game unbeaten run in all competitions. It's actually mad. City are well poised to complete the treble this season, and there's every chance for them to do that. They're only 1 point behind Arsenal and into the semi-finals of the Champions League and the finals of the FA Cup. So while the games are mounting up, Man City do have the team to give it the best accounting of themselves in each of those competitions. This is a Man City side that will be high in confidence going into this match, whereas Arsenal will probably not be feeling as confident after those recent drop points to teams which they should have beaten in all fairness. Sorry to Southampton and West Ham. To be fair to the Gunners, they did stage an impressive comeback against bottom of the league Southampton, but that was a match they should have breezed through and a match that they were at home for. I'm saying 3-1 to Manchester City. I think Man City will take all 3 points here in this massive title decider. They beat Arsenal in London, and I see them repeating that here. Haaland is in some brilliant form at the moment, and Arsenal are really feeling the loss of some of their injured players. Saliba especially is a huge loss. Arsenal do have good players, and their league position reflects that. They've been playing some brilliant football this season, but their recent results don't bode well for the North London side. It's going to be a really tough match in Manchester, and both teams will be up for it for sure, but I think Manchester City just have the edge on Arsenal. And then we move on to Thursday fixtures, and we start with Southampton versus Bournemouth. Now this is a very important match for both sides, as Southampton need all the points they can get, as do Bournemouth, as Bournemouth find themselves 15th after their loss to West Ham, whereas Southampton find themselves rooted to the bottom of the table, and despite some very impressive performances against top sides, they just haven't been able to lift themselves off the bottom. Southampton and Bournemouth are quite evenly matched in terms of their squads and performances, so it should be a good match to watch. It's a 6 point for both sides, as Southampton look to climb off the bottom of the table, and Bournemouth looks to move further away from the drop zone, although they're fairly safe already on the points they have. I think it's 33 points to Bournemouth and 29 to Leeds, I want to say. Just off the top of my head, don't quote me on that though. I'm going to say 2-1 to Bournemouth. I think the Cherries will take this one. Southampton can perform, and we've seen that in this season, but they do drop some awful performances as well. hence why they're bottom of the league. Bournemouth have become a more solid side over the past few weeks, and despite being dominated by the Hammers, should still be able to deal with the Saints at St Mary's. Southampton don't offer that potent attacking threat that West Ham do, and while they do have players that can score goals, as we saw against Arsenal, they're just not as good as West Ham. They're not as refined, I feel, and I think that can be seen in their performances. I think Bournemouth shouldn't really have too much trouble with Southampton, but it will be a tight match as well, because 6 points are on the line. Southampton are going to be fighting for it, but I do think Bournemouth just have the edge on them. And then we move on to Everton versus Newcastle United. The Toffees host an informed Newcastle side who are gunning for Champions League football. I don't think anyone would want to host Newcastle after that performance they put out against Spurs, but Everton are unfortunately the lucky ones. Everton will set up to frustrate the Magpies and to try and blunt their attack. Newcastle can come out swinging, and I'm sure we'll see them doing that again too. When Newcastle come out swinging, they put out a very dominant performance. We saw it against West Ham, we saw it against Tottenham, we might see it against Everton. Everton have slipped into the relegation zone after drawing to Palace, so they need all the points they can get to ensure their survival. They're 18th by virtue of goal difference with Leicester, so they really do need all the points they can get, and to not let in as many goals as they do. I can't see Everton being dominated by Newcastle, despite Newcastle's amazing performances as of late, because they set up really defensive and they can hit teams on the counter with varying levels of success. We've seen them score a goal here and there. They're not really known for their attacking prowess, neither is Dyche football, but Everton, they can be quite defensive and frustrate teams at the best of times. But I'm going to say 3-0 to Newcastle United. I do think Newcastle will win this match. We did see Everton hold Palace to a draw, and while they like to score, they're not as potent as Newcastle, so it'll be a much tougher clash for the Toffees. But they are at home, so it could be a bit easier for them. This is a Newcastle side full of confidence after that destruction of Tottenham, so there's no doubt they'll attack from the off, and probably nick a couple goals in the process. And finally, Tottenham Hotspur versus Manchester United. A battle for top 4, and after getting dominated by Newcastle, Tottenham will be looking to swiftly turn that around against Manchester United. But that's a tall order at the best of times. As with Brighton, United took their FA Cup clash all the way to extra time and penalties, so there's always this possibility of that tiredness creeping in. Tottenham looked awful in those first 20 or so minutes against Newcastle, but managed to pull things together and only conceded a goal after, strengthening and sorting out just their football in general. If Tottenham aren't on it from the off, then Manchester United will punish them, as Newcastle did. And there's something about this Tottenham side which doesn't fill me with confidence. Now, I'm not a Tottenham fan, I don't root for Tottenham, but just watching their performances, they don't seem confident in anything they're doing. Like, only Kane is the one really putting in a performance, and that's to be expected from your captain and top goal scorer. But he's looking like he'll leave in the summer as well, so that's not good for Tottenham anyway. And I think especially since Conte left, with that fiery speech he gave, I think he did expose some of the flaws of Tottenham. And that's been seen in their performances since his departure. United have performed brilliantly this season and look to have staked a claim to Champions League football next season. But this is a huge match for the top 4 race, and anything can happen as tensions will be running high for both sides. I'm saying 3-1 to United. I can't see Tottenham getting anything from this clash. As I've said, United are in brilliant form, but they do have that FA Cup extra time on their legs, so it'll be very interesting to see how this affects the fixture. Even with that though, I do not see Tottenham getting anything from this clash. I think they lack the confidence to take this match to United. I think they lack the conviction as well. They're playing for top 4 football, but if we compare it to last season where they were fighting, they showed like real desire to get top 4. They don't really have that this season. I'm not sure what's changed. But I think we'll see a United demolition job against a lacklustre Tottenham side. Spurs really need to sort things out if they want top 4 football next season. Right now, Europe in general is a pipe dream, I think. But yeah, that's been my Game Week 33 Premier League predictions. Some midweek football, so hopefully, maybe that sways the results and I get a couple more right. Who knows? I've been O2GT. Hope you have enjoyed. Please leave your predictions down below. I do read them if you leave them. And yeah, I shall see you guys in the next video. Peace.